The first time my mother called my graduation a failure ceremony, I was standing alone outside the engineering hall in a borrowed black gown, watching other families crowd their children with flowers and cameras. "Why should we come celebrate unemployment?" she had said over speakerphone while my older brother laughed in the background. "Your cousin owns 2 restaurants already. You still study like a child." The line disconnected before I could answer. That morning, I sat in the 3rd row gripping my degree with numb fingers while strangers filled the auditorium with applause that should have belonged to me. Every empty seat beside me felt louder than the dean's speech. I remember staring at the polished floor, listening to heels clicking across it, wondering how people survive becoming invisible inside their own family. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. "Is this Daniel Carter?" A calm voice asked. "I'm calling from Confrontation Technologies. Our CEO watched your quantum systems presentation online last week." I froze. Around me, graduates were hugging their parents while I stood alone near a vending machine smelling burnt coffee and rain drifting through the open doors. "We'd like to recruit you directly," the voice continued. "Base compensation starts at $1 million annually with stock options. Total package exceeds 7 figures. For a moment, the entire world went silent except for my own breathing. 3 hours later, my mother called for the first time in weeks. Her voice sounded softer now, careful. "We need to talk," she said. "Family meeting tomorrow." I looked down at the graduation medal they once mocked. Then I looked at the contract in my trembling hands. And for the first time in my life, I decided I wouldn't arrive alone. I grew up in a house where success only counted if it was loud enough to impress other people. My older brother Marcus inherited my father's confidence before he inherited the family construction business. My younger sister Lena mastered charm early, the kind that made relatives hand her money and attention without effort. I was the quiet middle child who fixed broken laptops during family dinners while everyone talked over me like background music. When I was 14, I built a small trading algorithm that earned enough money to replace our dying refrigerator. My father told relatives Marcus had handled the situation. I never corrected him. That became the pattern. If I succeeded quietly, someone else wore the credit. If I failed once, the mistake became my identity. By college, I stopped explaining myself entirely. I worked night shifts in the campus IT department, slept 4 hours a day, and spent weekends researching distributed systems. While my family joked that I was collecting expensive homework, they measured worth in visible things: cars, followers, handshakes, noise. My work lived inside servers and code no one could see. Still, part of me kept hoping they would notice someday. Not admire me, just notice me. But the closer I moved toward something meaningful, the more they treated me like an embarrassment they planned to outgrow. The week before graduation, my mother hosted a dinner for Marcus at the house. He had signed a contract for a new commercial property downtown, and the entire dining room glowed with candlelight and expensive wine like a celebration scene from a movie. I was there too, though no one had invited me personally. Halfway through dinner, my aunt asked when my ceremony was scheduled. Before I could answer, Marcus smirked into his glass. "Same day as real people work," he said casually. A few relatives laughed. Not cruelly, worse, automatically. My mother cut her steak with slow precision. "Your brother's just worried about you," she said without looking at me. "You've spent so many years in school. At some point, life has to begin." I remember the soft clink of silverware more than the words themselves. Later that night, I overheard my father near the kitchen doorway, speaking to one of his business partners. "He's smart," Dad admitted quietly, glancing toward me for half a second. "But some people aren't built for the real world." The sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. After dinner, Marcus tossed me his car keys without even asking. "Move my car out front," he said, already turning away mid-sentence. I took the keys silently, not because I respected him, because I wanted them all to keep underestimating me a little longer. The real turning point came the night before graduation. I was alone in the campus lab at almost midnight, finishing revisions on a distributed security model I'd spent 2 years building. Rain tapped softly against the windows while fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My phone buzzed on the desk. Family group chat? Marcus had sent a photo from a rooftop restaurant downtown. Everyone was there, my parents, my sister, cousins, even relatives visiting from out of state. Caption, "Celebrating real business success tonight." No one had mentioned the dinner to me. I stared at the screen for a long time, longer than I should have. Not angry, just tired. Then another notification appeared. An email from Confrontation Technologies. At first, I assumed it was automated rejection, feedback from the conference where I'd presented my research weeks earlier. Instead, the message contained an invitation to a private video call with their executive board at 7 the next morning. I almost declined. I was exhausted, but something inside me shifted during that quiet moment in the empty lab. I realized I had spent years begging silently for approval from people already committed to misunderstanding me. The next morning, I walked into that interview wearing the same cheap suit I'd owned since sophomore year. 90 minutes later, the CEO leaned back in his chair and smiled faintly. "We don't think you understand how valuable your work is yet," he said. For the first time in years, neither did I. I accepted Kronvale's offer 2 days after graduation and signed the contract through a private legal portal before telling anyone outside the company. The salary alone was more money than my father's business had made in several years. But the real value was in the equity package. I understood enough about acquisition, structures, and projected growth to know what the shares could become if the company expanded the way analysts expected. So I stayed quiet. When my mother called for the family meeting, her tone carried the same polished softness people use before asking for favors. She never mentioned my graduation again. Instead, she asked vague questions about my future plans, carefully circling around the rumors she had clearly already heard from relatives. I answered politely and gave her nothing. That night, I contacted Kronvale's relocation coordinator, finalized my move to Seattle, and requested a company vehicle for airport pickup the following week. Then I called the university administration and arranged for an additional copy of my graduation medal and thesis portfolio to be professionally framed, not for pride, for evidence. Over the years, I had learned something important about people like my family. Confrontation rarely changes them. Public perception does. I didn't want revenge that sounded emotional. I wanted silence sharp enough to force them into self-awareness. So instead of arguing, I prepared documentation, timing, and one carefully planned appearance. And for once, I let their assumptions work in my favor. The family meeting was held at my parents' house the following evening. When I arrived, Marcus's new black SUV already sat in the driveway like a trophy on display. Through the dining room windows, I could see everyone gathered around the table dressed in careful concern, rehearsing sympathy before I even walked inside. My mother opened the door with a smile that looked unfamiliar on her face. "We've been worried about you," she said softly. I nodded and stepped past her. The room smelled like coffee and polished wood. My father stayed seated at the head of the table, fingers folded together in the same posture he used during negotiations. Marcus barely looked up from his phone. Then my mother finally asked the question they had invited me there for. "So, what exactly is happening with this company?" I placed a slim black folder on the center of the table. Inside were the signed employment contract, relocation documents, stock agreement, and a printed article announcing Kronvale's newest $17 billion expansion project. Silence settled instantly. Marcus picked up the contract first. I watched the confidence leave his face line by line. My father adjusted his glasses twice before speaking. "$1 million?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. No speeches, no anger, no victory lap. Then I reached into my bag and placed my framed graduation medal beside the contract. "The ceremony was important to me," I said calmly. "I noticed none of you came." No one answered. For the first time in my life, the silence belonged to them instead of me. My mother cried first, not loudly, just quiet tears sliding down her face as she stared at the graduation medal resting beside the contract, like evidence in a courtroom. She kept touching the edge of the frame without looking directly at me. Marcus reacted differently. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly, pretending the numbers didn't affect him. But I noticed how many times he reread the salary line, jaw tightening each time. For years, he had been the standard everyone measured success against. Suddenly, the comparison no longer favored him. My father stayed silent the longest. That disturbed me more than anger would have. Eventually, he cleared his throat and asked practical questions about the company. Relocation? Stock options. The kind of questions men ask when they realize the person they underestimated understands a world they no longer control. No one apologized directly. Families rarely do. Instead, the atmosphere shifted into something heavier. Recognition. And that was enough, because the real consequence wasn't jealousy or regret. It was the irreversible collapse of the role they had assigned me my entire life. The quiet disappointment, the invisible son, the backup child. People care about stories like this because almost everyone knows what it feels like to be reduced by the people whose approval mattered most. Sometimes revenge is not destroying them. Sometimes it is forcing them to finally see you clearly, after they taught themselves not to. A week later, I left for Seattle before sunrise. The city was still dark when the driver from Cronvale picked me up at the airport. Glass towers reflected against the rain-soaked streets, cold and silver beneath the morning sky. For the first time in years, my future felt larger than the opinions I had grown up inside. My family started calling more after that. My mother sent longer messages now, asking whether I was eating properly, whether the apartment was nice, whether we could start over. Marcus suddenly wanted business advice about technology investments. Even my father began ending conversations, with something close to respect in his voice. I answered politely. But distance had changed me in ways they couldn't fully understand. Success didn't heal the loneliness of those earlier years. It didn't erase the empty chair at graduation or the countless moments. I learned to celebrate myself, quietly because no one else would. What it did give me was clarity. I stopped chasing recognition from people determined to misunderstand me. At Cronvale, nobody cared who my family was. They cared whether my work mattered. And every day I walked through those office doors, I felt something unfamiliar settle inside me. Peace earned through survival, not approval. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't making people suffer. It's building a life so complete that their rejection no longer has the power to define you.